Hello everyone, and welcome to the first CBAA webinar brought to you with the assistance of the wonderful Community Media Training Organisation, our first for 2018, Tech Bootcamp for the non-technical, what you need to know about your station stuff. This is following on from a very successful session that took place at the 2017 CBAA Conference, providing technical guidance on various aspects of broadcasting catered to a non-technical audience. It's going to be presented by John Maisels. Geordie from the CMTO will be here assisting things. G'day, Geordie. How you going? We've got a lot to get through tonight. If anyone sort of misses out on anything, you've got to leave early or anything like that, that's no worries. A recording of the session will be available. And, of course, the CBAA is more than happy to answer any questions that you might have about this, as is the CMTO. And I would urge anyone who's wanting to learn more and refine their practices at their station to check out that CMTO website, cmto.org.au. John Maisels, our presenter for this evening. I have just turned your microphone on and I am giving you permission to show your screen, sir. There you go, mate. You ready to go?
Well, I don't know. We'll find out which one of the which one of the four screens here, because I'm a very technical person, it's decided to let me see. So I hope it's showing the right screen.
It is. I'm seeing text, white background.
I can see what you're seeing, Danny. In fact, I have a camera in your room, and no, don't do that. Don't do that. I've told you before. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the session. So, let's see. In the best manner of actually sharing things and with television, I thought I'd just say yes. Look, I'm really here. This is a real person in a real room. What none of us knows, this is all very exciting, is what happens when there is somewhere between 100 and 200 people on this training and what that actually does. We're experimenting a bit tonight. So I'm now going to go and hide myself, but who knows, I might come back a little later during the Q&A. So tonight, Tech Bootcamp for the non-technical and what you need to know about your station stuff. And this is a follow-on from pretty much the same session that we did at CBAA. And the whole reason for doing this session is because there's a shortage of techs. We know that. There's a shortage of people who understand technology. We understand that. But that means there's a shortage of understanding about what it is you don't know about technology. So I will many, many times tonight use the term, you need to know what you don't know. And at the end of tonight, and this is going to be a fire hose, I can't apologize too much for that, but we have an hour. I'm going to absolutely fire hose you. You'll be able to go back and listen, watch, rejoin, and there will be material that we'll produce afterwards, all to help you to understand what it is that you don't know. But right now, we're working on the basis that there's a whole lot of stuff you don't know, and a lot of that stuff you don't even know. You don't know. So, the advertising. Today, this program is brought to you by the letter T, and words starting with T include technologists, tools, training, and of course, Technorama. Yes, I'm the president of Technorama. I'm going to mention Technorama a number of times. It's also brought to you by the number 10. The number 10 is all it costs you to become a member of Technorama. I'll remind you about that a little later as well. Special announcement right at the start of the show, Technorama 18, we've announced it's going to be held in Melbourne. At the end of this session, I'm going to give you some of the details about that. And a lot of people have been asking us and saying, can I start booking? Yes, we're going to help you do that. So that'll be at the end of the session when maximum number of people, I hope, will be with us. Now, for the questions, if you've got a question, just whack your question into the window. Danny will be looking at that. We're going to, unless there's a clarification question where we've got to stop everything or the audio's breaking up or something silly, we're going to hold the questions until the end, and there will be plenty of opportunity to answer questions, and we'll keep going until Danny turns into a vampire. And there is a prize for the best answer, but I think I get that. Now, you might be wondering who I am. So for the people who haven't met me, okay, I'm also known as the Maze. I'm a technologist and a versatilist. I started doing community radio when I was very young, 12 probably. I've been a commercial and community on-air presenter. I've been a commercial and community technologist. I was the founding chair of 3PBS. I'm a founding member of Technorama and the current president. I've also been for a number of years a CBF grant assessor, and I'm absolutely committed to trying to bridge the gap between the people who don't understand technology and the people who do. So think of me as the broadcast professional. It's what I do as a career these days, and a lot of that has come out of the experience in community radio. Now, the reason we're here is because you don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. You can't know everything. You don't need to feel bad about not knowing everything. That's okay. But you do need to know what you don't know. It is not okay to not know what you don't know. And it's not okay to accept bad advice because you don't know. And cards on the table, I have seen over the last couple of years a number of situations in which people were given very bad advice, and because they didn't know what they didn't know, they weren't able to question the advice. They took the advice at first value and face value, and as a result made some decisions that might not have been strategically wonderful. So today is about helping you to understand what you don't know. This is the ignorance map. The elephant in the room is that most technical people just don't want to know. They're people who could know, they just don't. Now, that doesn't actually help anybody. It certainly doesn't help technologists. It never helped me when I was on a board and my fellow board members say, oh, that's tech, we don't want to know, you know that. It's bad. It's bad when you don't know and you pretend to not know and you don't want to know. That just hinders the process. So let's have a look at what we've got here. Firstly is denials. It's all the things that are too painful to know, so you shove your head in the sand. And that is very, very scary stuff. Taboos are the conventional wisdoms that go unchallenged. We've always done it that way. We're going to continue doing it that way. Why is that a good business model? It's not. The unknown knowns are the things you could know, but you don't know them right now. That's okay. You can learn those things. You just don't know them right now. A lot of you will be in this position right now once I get onto the technical stuff later in the session. The error box, this is the real danger place. This is the one you need to be very scared of. This is the things you think you know, but it turns out you don't. If you don't have a strat plan in place, if you don't have a station diagram in place, if you don't have technologists who really do know what they say they know, you're in this space, and that's a scary space. The unknown unknowns, well, that's lots of us, because everybody can't know everything about everything. The known unknowns is where we want to get to today. So by the time I finish today, I will have been through all of the elements of a radio station, and we will have some idea of what goes into the technology that makes your radio station work. The basis for the session is, of course, the challenge that everybody has. Station management has a business responsibility. Your station managers, your station admin people, or people who are doing programming, the board, they all have a business responsibility, which is to ensure that the station continues to trade. Thing is, broadcasting is a technology business. Doesn't matter how much good programming you've got. If somebody turns the transmitter off, you don't have a radio station. If the programming is bad, but your transmitter is working, at least people can still listen. So it's important that you understand the technology and you're making good decisions based on good understanding. But we have done a really bad job of training in this country. Actually, globally, it's the same everywhere. And the amount of training that is available to even help people understand how broadcasting works has been depleting through the years. So now business responsibility isn't always supported by specific technical knowledge, because these days a lot of people are learning hand to mouth. They're learning from the people who hand technology over to them, who hand it over to somebody else, and it's a mess, really it is. So a lot of decisions are being made by people who don't know what they don't know. Right, so here we go. We're going into a fire hose. I will take you to the point where you know some questions to ask. You know who to ask. At the end of the session, you will have absolutely no doubt about where you could go to ask some of those questions and where to find people to ask the questions. So at that point, you will know some of the things that you don't know, and certainly some of the things that you don't know now. So I'm going to cover some technical language. I'm going to cover the end-to-end signal path. I'm going to talk a little bit about the alignment of priorities, which is technical versus management. I'm going to talk about some regulatory stuff versus operational stuff, because the regulatory stuff will define what you do and drive how you do it. But the operational stuff is actually what you're on about. And in passing, I'm going to talk about some of the areas where grant application mistakes are commonly made. Having assessed a very large number of grant applications and having looked at these from a technical point of view, I'm really here to try and help you with the upcoming grant cycle to put in applications that won't be tossed out because they're silly. Let's put them where where proper decisions can be made about the application you're putting in. Quickly about communicating with your tech people, and I covered this in a session a year and a half ago at the CBAA 2016 conference. Your techs are typically driven by four things. They are the four universal drivers of technologists. Your techs want to make things, they want to fix things, they want to manage risk, and they want to uphold the truth. Make things is obvious, fix things is obvious. Manage risk is the conversation where you say you're a technologist, I want to do the following thing in the studio. The conversation that's going on in that person's head is probably, ooh, if we do this, it's going to create that situation. I don't know how to get around that. Oh, we've got this piece of equipment that's broken. Oh, that's not coming back from the manufacturer yet. We haven't even funded it. No, we can't do that. But every technologist is driven to manage risk as they see it. And sometimes that risk is, well, always that risk should be about keeping your station out of trouble. And every technologist that I know is driven to uphold the truth. And that's why when you say to a technologist, when will this be ready? Will it be ready after lunch? Can I have it by 3 o'clock? They might not be able to tell you, and they won't lie about it. Technologists are actually pretty crappy liars. At the end of the day, also, your technologists need hugs. This is over and over observed, so make sure your technologists know they are appreciated, because they're not driven by money and they're not driven by a whole lot of other things you might think. Booze, whatever. They're driven by generally a love of pizza, a love of coffee, and your appreciation for a job well done. If you want to go and find out about what those drivers are, it's on the Technorama website. A replay of that presentation, and you can go to the Technorama website and have a look here under the tab marked Education, then pick the Resources tab. It's there. Now, what should be important to you? A couple of very simple things. How does your station sound? After all, your listeners are your customers. If your station doesn't sound good, you are not doing the right thing for your customers. You want them to come back. Good programming is a major part of that. Keeping your listeners happy in terms of the contract between them and you, as in, are you doing the job that you set out to do? Important. But a good sound, really important. How well does your station work? Your volunteers are your human capital. That's one of the most important assets that you have. If things aren't working correctly in your station because technology is falling down, your volunteers will be negatively impacted, and that means they won't be able to do the best possible job. So a focus on making things work just to support your volunteers is also really important. The final piece, are you adequately resourced? Do you have tech volunteers? Are you going after tech volunteers? Because they're your architects and builders. They're the people that will keep you out of trouble. And those people should not only be keeping you out of trouble right now, they should be helping you look to the future, and you should be encouraging them to do that job. When it comes to managing technology training, technology change, there's a number of pretty important considerations. The first one is, who knows what? Do you have a list of who knows what in your station? Do you have the envelope that is marked tear open in case of trouble? It's sort of like, break glass in case of fire. Do you know where all the passwords are? Do you know the phone numbers? Do you know the web addresses? Do you know all the things that could keep you out of trouble if the person who is looking after your technology is suddenly unavailable for whatever reason? Do you know enough to be able to validate what you're being told? Do you know enough to be able to keep your troops honest? And if you've got somebody advising you who maybe is underskilled but wants to pretend that they know more than they do, are you able to spot that? What's your disaster plan? Do you have a disaster plan? If your studio suddenly burnt down right now, where would you go? How would you stay on air? That is a really, really important topic, and it's an entirely separate topic that we will cover in a future webinar. At this stage, you most likely don't know what you don't know. And that's also a major challenge when it comes to managing change, because you don't know what change you have to manage. So what we're going to do is look at the basic architecture of a station, because that's the most important thing that you need to know. What is in the basic architecture of a station? If you were to sit down right now with a piece of paper and go, oh, it's this bit, this bit, this bit, you'd probably come up with a list like this. You have sources of programs, things that produce sound, microphones, tape players, CD players, program sources. You have a studio where the program sources live. You might have more than one studio. You might have a lot of studios. You might have no studio. You might just have the program sources sitting on a bench. You could still think of it as a studio. You will have some sort of control room. That might be a cupboard. It might be a corner of the same room that isn't the studio. It's still got the control functions where the output of the studio goes. You will have some way of getting to your transmitter. If the transmitter is in the same building that you are, that will be a piece of wire. If your transmitter is 40 kilometers away, it will be more than just a piece of wire. In fact, pieces of wire went away about 10 years ago. Really unfortunate, because landlines were just so good. So you will have a transmitter link. You will have a transmitter, because without a transmitter, you're not really a radio station. Very important. You will have an antenna, because without the antenna, the transmitter has nothing to deliver its signal into. Back at the ranch, you'll have an off-air receiver so you can hear what you're doing. Won't you? And then there's other stuff like computers and IT infrastructure. I'm not going to talk about computers and IT infrastructure at all in this session. This is going to be about how everything goes together. Now, how everything goes together should be something that you can produce at the drop of a hat. You should have a block diagram. The best way to show how all of this stuff is connected together at your station, and the first step in having a recovery plan, and the first step in knowing what you're going to do next, is to have a station block diagram. And the simplest form of block diagram is the hand-drawn block diagram that looks a little bit like this. Now, I could have spent a whole lot of time drawing nice charts for this and doing it with a computer design program. This diagram took me no more than 5 minutes to do by hand, and I'm putting up there very proudly because this says everything you need to say, and very neatly. You could give this to somebody and say, build my station, I want it to look like this. And from this hand-drawn diagram, they could accurately do that. This is a very simple technique, and we're going to go through this diagram step by step to show you how effective a hand-drawn diagram can be. When you come to do grant applications, what are the big cost centers at your station? What are the things that you're going to end up spending money on? Surprisingly, or not surprisingly, it's exactly the same stuff. The things that will appear in grant applications will be the same things I've just talked about. And the best way of showing where those things fit into your game plan in your grant application is by having a diagram like this that says, here's where this is going. This is why it is important. I cannot stress enough the importance of being able to show in a grant application why something is important to you and where it fits in your facility. So, all right, let's have a look at this diagram, and let's have a look at it in more detail. We're going to go through this diagram in extreme detail. So much extreme detail that I'm going to cover the whole thing in about 20 minutes. You'll be surprised. So let's start. Every radio station has studios. The studios are where all the sources are and where people typically are. A studio might be complex or it might be simple, and you might have more than one studio, and you might have a big studio and a smaller studio, or 2 big studios, or 12 studios, doesn't matter. They all more or less do the same thing, which is provide somewhere for somebody to put a program together. Control is the piece at the station where all your studios and everything else come together. And it might be as simple as a switch that selects between the studios and maybe a little bit of audio processing before the signal goes out the door to the transmission link. Oh, then we have the link. This is how you get from the studio to the remote transmitter. Just so you understand the convention of the diagrams here, you'll notice that I'm working from left to right. That's pretty normal for this type of diagram. And you'll notice there are little arrows, and the arrows show the direction in which the signal flows. Generally speaking, any engineer who's used to working with block diagrams like this will try to work from the top left corner down towards the bottom right corner, or from left to right. It's a convention. You can go the other way, and you'll see down below with the receiver piece, that's what RX is, receiver, you'll see the arrows go the other way. And I've sort of done that for a bit of convenience, just to show, yeah, the signal's sort of heading back towards the studio. But as you'll see in diagrams coming up, the one thing we try to avoid doing is having messy lines that cross each other, so that this is, at the end of the day, easy to understand. In this particular block here, you'll see the link transmitter, TX, has a little thing that looks like an antenna. I've got a little lightning flash there that shows the signal is heading through the air. It gets to the other antenna, it goes into the link receiver. That's what RX is. Over at the transmitter, we probably have a stereo processor. We will have the actual transmitter itself, and the transmitter is in more than one component, and we'll have a main antenna. Main antenna. You might have more than one. In fact, everything on this chart could be duplicated, and that's always a really good idea. Have some sort of level of redundancy, because when a component fails, you want to know where you go next. There are many redundancy strategies. I'm not particularly going to talk about that tonight, but everything here could be duplicated to any extent that you like, and I would encourage you to think about, what do you do if something goes wrong? If one of these components fails, what is your backup strategy? At a strategic planning level, you should be able to answer that question, and you should be able to answer it without even thinking. The final piece of our block diagram is the receiver. The receiver that picks up your off-air signal, makes that available to metering, to headphones, to speakers, and typically that receiver will be reticulated back into the studio. Again, you might have more than one receiver, and you might have different types of receiver, especially if you're transmitting on FM, you're transmitting on DAB, but also if you're transmitting via the web, receiver in this case could just be the web decoder that allows you to listen to your own off-air signal. It might not surprise you that I'm very much in favour of off-air monitoring, and I do have right next to me an iPad that is watching this broadcast, because as a long-term broadcaster, I feel very uncomfortable when I can't see my own off-air signal. So I do know the broadcast is working. Now, at this point, you might think we're out of trouble, we can do everything. No, it's not time to pass go yet. You should be thinking in the context of this diagram, what does this mean at your station? You can also be thinking, as we go through, what bits are you missing and where are you heading? And I will stress, you should be planning for the future, not for the past. So anytime you make a change at your station, it should be not what do we replace that is broken, but how can we move the game forward at the same time? And so I'll ask the question, does your strategy plan say what you want to achieve? Do you have the strategy plan for your technology group? And is technology part of your strategic planning process? And it is that process that should be driving your future technology requirements, not we want the nicest, shiniest thing, because when you put that in a grant application, believe me, people can see between the lines. Being able to say, this is part of our strategic planning process, is one of the most important and one of the strongest things you can say in an application. So now let's go and have a look at our plan. So here we are. We'll start with the studios. What's in a studio? If we drill into that little diagram and say, all right, let's just have a look at the microcosm of a studio. Most studios are the same. They will have microphones. They might have turntables. They might not. They might or might not have CDs. They might have phones. And the phones, by the way, might be for talking. They might be for on air. And if they're on air, they might be connected via what we call a hybrid. They might be connected to a phone channel on the mixer. You will also have things that today you really can't run a radio station without allowing for somebody to bring in a USB stick or an iPod or a whole collection of things that are now known as BYOD, bring your own device. And so these days, part of studio design is how you make it easy for somebody to bring their material in a form that isn't a CD or a piece of vinyl. And of course, you'll have headphones and you'll have speakers so that you can listen to what you're doing. All of this stuff in the studio is going to be glued together with a thing called the mixer. Mixers come in so many shapes and sizes. They come in so many colors. Some of them are safe for kiddies. Some of them will be digital, some of them will be analog. Mixers all do fundamentally the same thing. They take the sources that are available in the studio, they allow you to turn those sources on and off, control the level, listen to them before you go to air, connect the phone in if that's what you want to do, listen to your off-air signal, record something, and send a program from the mixer out of the studio into your control environment. There's your mixer. I did say before about the arrows. You'll notice there I'm showing the output coming from the right-hand side of the mixer going into the hybrid that connects to the phone system, and on the left-hand side, the phone, the person who's talking, comes out of the hybrid and goes into the mixer. That, by the way, very clever piece of electronics, and there are so many good and so many bad hybrids. Getting phones to work, again, a topic of its own. Studio design is also something we should mention. This is not just a matter of whacking a whole lot of things into a room and going, yep, there you are. There is a fundamental of studio design, which is, can everything be where everything else is? As soon as you start to design a new studio, the challenge is always being, where do you put everything? And when you look at ergonomics, when you look at the way people work, it's always about trying to make things be where a person most likely is going to reach or want to use them. I have a very large number of pet hates. I have a pet hate for touchscreens. I have a pet hate for having to use mice, rodents, particularly when I'm doing a radio program, because anything like that requires me potentially to disengage from somebody I'm interviewing while I work out whether I'm clicking on or touching the right thing. But there are so many ways of doing everything, and there are so many horses for courses. So my advice to you is, whilst you might be tempted to start thinking in terms of the equipment, always start by thinking in terms of, how does this piece of equipment affect human factors in the studio? And that applies particularly to the mixer, it applies particularly to sources and studio gear and where that is, and it applies particularly to how you use automation. The output of the studio goes to control. Control might be the cupboard, or it might be something more expansive than that. I have seen everything, control being everything from a tiny cupboard and a single device going through quite extensive equipment rooms. At its simplest, the control facility is where you find studio switching, probably where your automation computer lives so that the noise doesn't have to be in the studio. And it's where the signal comes out of the switching and goes to the link, where the signal is handed over to the link. Now, in the middle of that might be a processor of some sort. In this case, the processor, we're thinking about a thing that controls the levels, so that when your presenter turns the microphone up flat chat, they don't overload the link. Pretty important. or they don't overload the transmitter if you're connected directly to the transmitter. Really important from a regulatory point of view. Whether you have a processor at the station end of the chain or not, whether you put your stereo generator at the station end of the chain or not, this is not a discussion for tonight. I'll just let you know, processor and stereo generation might happen at the station or it might happen at the transmitter. And it's one of those, how do we architect our system? What equipment do we have? What is our link path? What is our technology? Where do we put the processor? It all goes into that discussion. So there is not a one-size-fits-all answer to where processing goes. But a lot of stations you will have a processor at the studio, if only to protect the link from overload. Especially these days with digital links, digital systems do not like being overloaded. Analog systems are very tolerant. Digital systems are not. So the transmission room, we have studio switching, audio processing, there could be gain control, a compressor, there could be brick wall control, which would be the limiter. You must somewhere be protecting your transmitter. That is really important because overdriving the transmitter means you're going to be using too much spectrum, and that's when the regulator, the ACMA in this case, will come after you. Control will also be where you most likely have your off-air monitoring, so it can be distributed back to the studios. And it's probably where you would have control of or switching of emergency and backup power, especially if your station has some sort of emergency services status. Emergency power, again, outside the ambit of this discussion, but I would strongly encourage you to have uninterruptible power supplies on as much of your equipment as possible. Whether that's one big banger uninterruptible power supply or a lot of smaller ones, again, it's a local decision. And whether or not you have a generator on site to cover for the power outages, again, a local decision, depends very much on the quality of your power. Air conditioning will probably be in the domain of control. Air conditioning is really important. Your equipment, by the way, probably doesn't care a lot about air conditioning. Your equipment doesn't really mind getting all that hot, but I can tell you people do. People will be the first thing to break. People will break way before the equipment will break. Air conditioning is an important topic. All right, so now we get to the link. What would a link be? In the old days, the link was pretty simple. It was a landline that got you from the studio to the transmitter. When Telstra took away landlines, they did the world the most awful disservice because landlines were really pretty good and solved a lot of technical problems. We've gone mostly now to digital links. A small number of people are still able to hang on to FM links. Here's the news, people. Those FM links aren't being taken away. Nobody is going to say you must go to a digital link. And if you have an FM link, do everything you can to hold on to that license. The one thing about an analog link is there is zero time delay between the input and the output of the link. So with an analog link, you can listen to yourself off air. As soon as you put a digital link in, you will have some number of milliseconds of delay, and that makes it somewhere between uncomfortable and impossible for a presenter to actually listen to themselves coming back off air, which means the presenters no longer have any idea of what they really sound like to a listener, because there's all this other processing in the way, because the transmitter does other things. And if you're not listening to yourself and the transmitter goes off in the middle of you talking, you don't know. And that could be a long amount of time. Links could be lots of technologies. They all do the same thing. They basically get you from near to far. Outside broadcast links do exactly the same thing. You might be using the same technology for an outside broadcast link as you are for a transmission link. You might. And again, I would say, if you have the option to hang on to an analog link, hang on to it for dear life. Analog versus digits is, again, a major topic that we can go into some other time at a detail level. But again, I stress, digital links are very much less forgiving for overload than analog links are. And if you overload a digital link, it sounds horrible. The other thing about a digital link is that if it breaks suddenly. So a digital link will keep working, and then it will stop. And if you have a digital link and you have the ability to manage the quality of that link, to be able to look at the two ends of the link and have it tell you how well it is performing, you'll be doing yourself a great service to track that, because you might spot by monitoring the quality of the link that you're about to have trouble. The tree that is growing up between you and the transmitter that you didn't know about, the birds that are getting away of the link, the people who are building something between you and the transmitter, and the crane gets in the way. All of these things, you'll get early warning if you can actually have a look at the data that many digital links give you about their performance. I encourage you to go and grab that data, work out how to keep it and track it over a long period. So now we're at the transmitter end. We've moved from the studio through our link and we're at the transmitter. The transmitter might be where you are, but it's most likely somewhere else for a whole lot of really good reasons. At the transmitter site, you will have most likely the stereo generator that turns your left and right into a composite FM signal. You'll have an exciter that takes the audio output from the generator and turns it into actual FM. So until you get to the exciter, what you're dealing with is still something that you could listen to with a pair of headphones. On the other side of the exciter, this is a signal that is your frequency, and it is some amount of FM. Typically, an exciter will produce a signal, say 5, 10, 20 watts. Following the exciter will be a power amplifier. So the power amplifier will take whatever the exciter puts out and will give you how much power you need to drive your antenna. So lots of FM. And then the signal goes to the antenna and disappears off as RF energy, radio frequency energy. So the technical term there is RF. The exciter and the power amplifier might be in the same box, and increasingly these days we see quite powerful transmitters in quite small boxes. So if you consider a 3RU box, which is sort of, I don't know, 3RU box is about 120 mils high. You can easily get a kilowatt out of a box that big these days. Quite extraordinary. At the transmitter, you will also have a dummy load, if you're lucky. That's so that if you need to transmit into something that doesn't radiate, so you can test your standby transmitter, that of course you have, you feed that into a dummy load, which means it doesn't radiate. Nobody else can receive the signal. Dummy loads are a good way to be able to test a transmitter, and you can look at the signal coming from the dummy load as opposed to your main transmitter and see if it's okay. Transmitter sites should probably have air conditioning. I know many don't, and certainly I looked after a transmitter site for many, many years that had no air conditioning at all. It got pretty hot, and there were times when that room became very uncomfortable to work in, and it certainly became uncomfortable for the transmitter. Temperatures up around 50, 60 degrees C are not uncommon in transmitter rooms I've been in. Not a lot of fun. However, transmitters will happily operate in that environment for a very, very long time, but you do need to consider that a transmitter that's operating at that sort of temperature will start to bake its components, and those components, capacitors particularly, will start to dry out. That can be fixed provided you have an appropriate maintenance cycle. So you just go in knowing that every 3 to 5 years you will need to go back and check all the power supplies, probably replace all the capacitors in the power supplies and a lot of the capacitors in the transmitter, just so that they don't fail. And finally, you'll have emergency and backup power, especially if you have some sort of emergency services status. You'll definitely want that. Now, I want to talk about antennae. And I'm going to spend more time talking about antennae than anything else because, believe it or not, that's one of the things that is least well understood, and it's one of the things that can get you into the most trouble. So let's just go through antennae, and then you can say, and we had a focal point. We learned about antennae. Here's probably the simplest sort of antenna that you would be likely to find in an FM station. This is what's called a vertical dipole. So the signal comes in one end, comes in sort of the connector on the left-hand end there. and goes along that horizontal piece. Those two horizontal beams are really just to get the driven elements, the things that actually radiate the RF, away from the mounting pole, because if they're too close to the pole, the signal will be seriously impaired. So antennas always have a way of getting the driven elements away from the pole that they're mounted on. And then you have the vertical bit, things sticking up and the things sticking down, and those are driven elements. That's a dipole, two poles, and the signal goes out from there. That's a simple dipole. You also get what's called a folded dipole. So it's sort of the same thing, but it's bent over. And this is a little bit more efficient than a simple dipole. It also looks a bit nicer, but essentially it works the same way. These two dipoles, the folded dipole and the vertical dipole, both radiate a signal in the vertical plane. So what that means is that the wavefront coming out of that antenna is vertically oriented, and if you have a receiver, you would want its antenna to also be vertical. If the antenna receiver is horizontal, it will only pick up roughly 1/100th of the signals going out. Now that's like a really rough number to throw out there, but just consider that quite a lot of the signal will vanish. If 1/100th of your signal is vanishing because the antenna is pointing the wrong way, you're not going to be receiving the best possible signal. Vertical antennae are easy to deal with because that folded dipole and the vertical dipole radiate evenly in the horizontal plane. So when you put that antenna element up like that, the signal goes out in all directions evenly, heading away from the station. Much harder to do that with a horizontal antenna, which is why we don't typically, and we don't typically find horizontally polarized antennae at community radio stations. There is, however, an even better way to do this, and this is what's called mixed polarization. With mixed polarization, we have a special antenna which creates a component that is in the vertical plane and a component in the horizontal plane. That sort of means that it doesn't matter which way you receive antenna points, it will get some amount of signal. Now, you don't get something for nothing. The rules of physics apply. So when you feed a signal into a mixed polarization antenna, roughly half of it goes in the vertical direction and roughly half of it goes in the horizontal direction. So this mixed polarization antenna element that you can see here will send the signal out roughly in a cylinder away from this element. Actually, it would try to send it in a sphere. It'd send it in all directions. So just think that the signal is heading out away from this antenna in all directions, but the signal itself has a sort of a bit that wobbles up and down and a bit that wobbles from side to side. Now, a single element isn't terribly useful. Perfectly workable, but not terribly useful. Why? Well, because I sort of corrected myself there when I said spherical. A simple antenna like this is sending a lot of signal where you don't want it, namely up and down as well as around. And like a light going through a lens, there are ways of focusing the beam. So instead of signal going up and down where it's not particularly useful, we send more of it outwards. We can sort of electrically squash the signal. So think about, like if you take a tennis ball and you put it on a bench and you put a weight on top of it, and what you end up with is something like donut shaped, and more of the stuff is heading outwards where you want it. We do that with an antenna by having more elements. So on the left, here's a pair of folded dipoles. This will squash the signal down a little bit. In the middle, we have 4 folded dipoles. This squashes the signal down even more. So more of the signal heads out than heads up and down. And from this process, we get what is called gain. So if we feed a 100-watt transmitter into the antenna on the left, we'll actually get the equivalent of 200 watts out of it compared to the spherical thing that the ACMA actually sets your power by. The antenna in the middle has 4 elements. It actually has a gain of 4. So 100 watts into that will give you the equivalent of 400 watts out in the direction of your listeners, as opposed to in the direction of the moon or in the direction of the building or the ground underneath the antenna. And the same thing with the mixed polarization antenna on the right-hand side. So there you've got 2 elements. Now, because we've already said the mixed polarization antenna is splitting the signal into a horizontal and vertical component, 2 of those together gives you roughly the same output in any plane compared to a single dipole. So you put 2 mixed polarization elements together and you get roughly the same gain that you would get from a single dipole. But by the way, you now have more energy going out in vertical and horizontal planes. And most community stations are licensed or licensable for mixed polarization even when you are still transmitting vertical. If you go and check your license, chances are it will say you are licensed for mixed polarization. And when you go from vertical polarization to mixed polarization, the ACMA allows you to put in double the transmitter input power so that you actually don't lose anything in the vertical plane and the horizontal plane. If all of that sounded like gobbledygook, now you know what you don't know, and we'll explain it later. All right, here's a practical exercise. How many antennas can you see in this picture? Can you spot them all? There could be lots of things in this picture, by the way. You might see a cow, or you might not. And you might see a person in a red striped shirt if you're looking for Wally, or you might not. What you should be able to see is the antenna on the left, which is a pair of folded dipoles. This is an FM array. It is sitting on a metal tower, very typical of a lot of stations. So this is going to have a gain of 2, and the signal will come out from that. The second antenna stack is this mixed polarization array. This is 4 elements, and it's sitting on a wooden pole. Yes, you don't have to mount things on a metal pole. In fact, there are some benefits if you don't. This case, it's not. It looks like a power pole. Now, it has to be a particularly high pole because FM is running, the frequencies we use, running at what we call the 3-meter band. It's a 3-meter wavelength. And those elements have to be roughly 3 meters apart. So even without going out there with a tape measure, I can tell you that the distance between that bottom element and the top element is roughly 9 meters. And if I move my mouse in here, you will see this element here up to that element here. There's going to be a 3-meter separation here, a 3-meter separation here, and a 3-meter separation there. So when you're asking the CBF for funding for an antenna and you say, we want 4 elements of mixed polarization, make sure that your building approval actually allows you to put in a pole of enough height, because you would want this bottom element to be at least 4 meters off the ground, certainly 4 meters off above, say, a stressed concrete slab, because that's going to act as a reflector. And you'll want some room at the top because you really ought to have a lightning catcher. So our 4 bays here of antenna probably needs a pole space in the order of 13 to 15 meters. That's non-trivial, and it's more than you're going to be able to put on the top of a typical building. There's a little aerial down here. Now, we're not at the top of this hill. The photo was taken below the hill, so this is all a bit well, a bit confusing really, and a bit misleading. But just imagine if we were at the top of the hill, probably all of these things are sitting quite a bit above the ground. That antenna there, which looks a little bit like a TV antenna, but you might be able to see that it's got a guy holding it in place so it can't wobble. That's probably the receive signal for the link coming from a radio station. A Yagi is just a particular type of antenna, which looks like one of those more complex UHF antennas that has lots of little rods, and that's how it gets additional gain. Yagis can have a lot of gain because you only want to send the power in the direction you want, and you only want to receive signal from a very specific direction. There's another antenna over here, and I have absolutely no idea what that is. That could be a ham radio antenna, it could be a CB antenna, it could be a communications antenna. I have absolutely no idea what that is. And just in case you're disappointed, did you all spot where Waldo was? Yes, right there. At your antenna site, there are some standard considerations. The most important thing about an antenna is it should be at the absolute maximum possible height. Why? Because at the frequencies we use, 100 megahertz or so, the signal heads pretty much straight towards the horizon in a straight line. So the higher you are as a receiver and the higher you are as a transmitter, the higher the more you will transmit, the further you will transmit, because essentially your signal is heading 40 kilometers until it gets to the horizon, and then it vanishes off into space. If your antenna is higher, then of course the horizon is further away. Your antenna is possibly vertical, and that's okay if you're running vertical polarization, because that situation is grandfathered, but mixed polarization is so much better for a whole lot of good technical reasons than vertical polarization. Your theoretical power output from your transmitter is going to be set in the lap. That's what authorizes you as a radio station. So that's set. It'll be 100 watts, 200 watts, it'll be a kilowatt, it's whatever the ACMA has set. The gain of your antenna, so how much boost you get to your transmitter by antenna design, okay, well that's set by the number of elements, and the actual power output that you get from an antenna is pretty easy to calculate. It's how much you're putting into it, what's coming out of your transmitter, times the antenna gain less, you know, whatever you're losing in your coax. Don't be fooled, by the way, a lot of stations lose a lot of power in the line, the coax that goes from the transmitter to the antenna. Non-trivial consideration and something you need to check for maintenance purposes. A lot of stations have gone off the air simply because their antenna cable deteriorated and filled full of water or got chewed out by rodents or something else. So the final piece, and you can have a look at this chart when you download it, and you can have a look on the replay, that basically the whole thing about antennas is you want to put more signal in the direction of your listeners and less where your listeners aren't. Your listeners aren't underneath the antenna and they're not above the antenna, most likely. And some of you might have combiners. You might be sharing an antenna. Well, this is what a combiner looks like, and you can come back and look at these pictures later. Or if you've checked on the Q&A site, or you checked on Technorama, one of our members is actually trying to sell exactly this combiner. So if you are in need of a combiner for your station, we know where one is, and this one is for sale. This can be reconfigured. At the moment, it's configured for 4 transmitters into the one antenna. Finally, we're back to the station and our receiver, our off-air receiver. Off-air monitoring is pretty simple, and the advice is have the best receiver you can. Monitor your transmitter. This is how you know that you are distributing the right thing. A typical piece of distribution at your station will be a receiver going into a distribution amplifier that then makes that available to headphones, to power amps, to multiple studios, to the building, to the toilet, so that people can hear. Yes, so that people can hear. If your station is digital or your link is digital, then there are additional considerations, because digital introduces latencies, it introduces delays, and it is, as I said earlier, very difficult to listen to yourself when there are latencies in the way and when your signal is coming back to you with delay. Your presenters typically will not be able to listen to themselves with more than 5 to 10 milliseconds of delay, or it will just sound weird, objectionable, or impossible. Something that we see in grant applications all the time, it's worn out. Not everything at your station wears out. Some things will. Headphone pads, microphone pop shields. Oh, microphone pop shields. Pickup styli will break. CD lasers wear out. After about 5 years, they probably need replacing. They just don't run forever. Faders and switches and things that get used. The surrounds for speakers that go around the cone sometimes do in fact fall apart after 5 or 10 years. Antennae are out in the weather. Cables, transmission systems sometimes do wear out. or deteriorate to a point where they need to be replaced. Power supplies, particularly in equipment, can fail. Power supplies in computers will fail, most likely thing to fail, if they are running continuously for a very long time, and especially if they're running in a bad environment, a hot environment. And transmitters will start to fail after some amount of time if you don't do periodic maintenance. What doesn't fail is microphones, mixers, although I've just said faders and switches need care and attention. But if you're providing care and attention for the faders and switches, mixers will probably last for a very long time. Signal processors don't wear out. A good diagram doesn't wear out. On-air lights probably don't wear out. Non-mechanical things probably don't wear out. If you're making an application for something that needs to be replaced because it's deteriorated, make a good case. Don't assume somebody will buy, oh, the microphone wore out, it's 5 years old. It sort of doesn't work like that. Your absolute goals should be to take what you know now and align your board and management priorities with your volunteer and your technology priorities. So if you're going to come out of this with anything, go and get your station documented at a block diagram level. Know that the station is set up and it's aligned correctly and everything talks to everything else at the right signal levels. Go and create an inventory of the skills available to your station. And don't forget, there is a tech community, and if you have an overload situation where you're doing a special project, put the word out. People will often come and help on a one-off basis. They won't be at your station every week, but you can always say, we've got a special project, we've got the transmitter building, we've got the outside broadcast, we're doing a barn raising. People will come and help for special projects. You can particularly get help from Technorama and from CMTO training. And every so often you should get somebody in with calibrated gear. Doesn't need to happen very often, but do it just for the peace of mind of knowing that your station is actually correctly aligned. We did an exercise a bit like that a couple of weeks ago, and you can read about it under TX Blitz, Transmitter Blitz, on the Technorama website. Speaking of the Technorama website, you can help support development of the sector's biggest asset, which is its technologist. Get your technologists to become members of Technorama. Hell, even if you're not a technologist, join Technorama. It costs $10 a year. It's not expensive. You can join online. You could join online tonight. I'm going to measure my success by how many people go online immediately after this session, or even now while I'm talking. I'm not proud. And join Technorama. You can do it online from the homepage, www.technorama.org.au. Bang. If you can't find it, send a note to info@technorama.org.au and tell me I'm an idiot and I'll get it fixed. Get your station on the mailing list. Even if you're not going to be a member or you've already got people who are members, make sure that your admin people are on the mailing list. You can do that from the technorama.org homepage. And join the Q&A. It's just a fabulous, it's a closed Facebook group. We ask you to answer questions. When you answer the questions, if you look like you're actually a real person associated with a real community station, we will approve you for membership. And it's turning out to be just a great asset for the community. I'm very proud to say that Technorama 2018 is going to be in Melbourne. It's been in Sydney the last couple of years for a number of logistic reasons. TR18 is in Melbourne. The dates are 18th to 20th of May. Put that in your diary. The announcement is on the Technorama website now, and we'll be announcing more as we go. And tonight, I'm announcing that the location for TR18 is going to be at the Maltese Club in Parkville, a really good venue. It's the place where it happens that we ran the very first Technorama, and we've been back once since. It's very convenient, and particularly over the weekend, there's scads of parking, which is just wonderful. And the Vibe Hotel just up the road has offered us a rate of $140 a night, which includes breakfast for one person. So if there's two of you, somebody's going to have to buy an additional breakfast. But that's a really, really good rate. If you have a look around, we'll be putting information up about other venues, other hotels in the area. They're ranging from about $100 up, And of course, there's backpacker accommodation not too far away, and the city's not too far away if you want to actually go into the CBD. I checked airfares last night. Currently, $300 or less from Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide. It's a little bit more from Perth, a little bit more from Tasmania. It's unfortunately more from Alice Springs, but everything is. It's really cheap to get to Melbourne from Melbourne. That was a surprise. Who knew? We're planning the education event. We ran one last year on small board computing, and we're planning to do a technical event, a highly technical event for the day of Friday. So if you think that might interest you, plan your travel accordingly. That will be during the day, and the welcome event on Friday, we've confirmed, will be at Joy FM. And we're keeping the registration rates very close to those for TR17, which means it'll be under $100 for Technorama members who are doing early bird join, and we'll be making the rates and the joining process available in about 2 weeks. So all the details will be rolled out on the website. I also want to let you know that we're starting work on our training program and our training packages. So welcome to T-Cubed, the Technorama Technology Training Program. And there's going to be 3 pillars to that: webinar series for technologists, intermediate and advanced topics. So this is, seriously geeky, no apologies there. But we're also going to be running a webinar series for non-technologists. So this will be basic electronics, introductory subjects, things you need to know to manage technology, and stuff to help you run the station and to help you relate to your technologists. The 3rd pillar will be on-site series, and I'm hoping to be able to do one of these before we get to actual Technorama. And this will be where, in conjunction with an actual station, we go in and run hands-on training in the station, on the station gear. The output of this is that the station gets its gear aligned, the people get trained on real stuff, and we do a wonderful thing, which is added knowledge and better sound for listeners. How about that? So, some things to take away. First thing is, it's okay to not know stuff. It is not okay to pretend that you do know. Don't pretend that you know. If you don't know how to explain a tech problem, it's fine. Take photos, provide evidence, draw diagrams, throw that to people, particularly on the Q&A, and say, what does this mean? Don't just guess what your problems are. There are plenty of people that you can ask. By the way, diagrams improve your chances with CBF grant applications. I cannot stress that enough. Put technology training into your strategic planning process. Tech training should be on your strat plan. And support the CMTO and the Technorama training agenda. Put technology strategy on your strat plan. Make sure your strategic plan has a plan for future technology, and keep the tech strat plan current. And think big. Reach for the sky. Don't reach for the floor. Don't do what you've always done. Don't go backwards. What could you do? Ensure that your technologist is a member of Technorama. It costs almost nothing, really. And ensure that your management, your admin, your chair, your volunteers are on the Technorama mailing list, that your station is on the Technorama mailing list, because that costs nothing and that'll keep you in touch. And tell us what we can do to help. Send an email, ask, send your people to TR18. And so here we go, the big finish. Tech's a bit like driving. Once upon a time, you needed to be a mechanic. In fact, I think Her Majesty the Queen started her life as a mechanic. I remember seeing that somewhere. But you don't have to be a mechanic to be a good driver. We don't expect every presenter is going to be able to go out and tweak the transmitter. We just want you to not ignore the engine. There you go. Join Technorama, get on the Q&A group, ask away. There are experts there who can help you, and invest in your technologists. Go and grow a team. Budget to send somebody to Technorama. And thank you for joining us. And because I have ears, Danny, you've joined.
Oh, I have indeed joined.
That was the throw.
Mate, thank you so much for that. I will take control of the screen now. I do have a few questions coming through that I will give to you. First one is, you mentioned that the horizon is the endpoint of a signal. With some FM stations, and this is Nick Brown from Alpine Radio asking this one, some FM stations I can get them many kilometres away from the station, certainly further than 40 kilometres. Why is that?
Well, if the station's antenna is high enough, or if you're high enough, then the distance that the signal will travel is further. So there are two things that help a signal travel. One is that either the transmit point or the receive point is high. That's why TV transmitters are always high, and it's why FM transmitters are always high. And if you are high, it's really good. So, for example, if you're in Sydney, if you're in the Blue Mountains and you're at the top of the Blue Mountains, you're going to get signals from all over the place, way more than 40 kilometres away, because the horizon is commensurately further away. The other thing that happens with FM signals, and this happens occasionally, especially in summer, you'll get freak reception, and there are two factors there. One's a thing called sporadic E, where the signal bounces off the E layer of the ionosphere. The other one is what's called tropospheric ducting, trop ducting, which is great. It's like the atmosphere opens up a little tube and carries the signal from one place to another. It's bizarre, but that's why you might suddenly receive an FM station for a little while that is 1,000 kilometres away. It does happen. And it's one of the things that creates great challenges for frequency planning.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks so much for that, John. Denise gave us a question, which I noticed she's just left the session. She said, can you give us the fail rate of equipment as a guide? I don't know if that's something that you've got, but if you do have that, maybe that might be something I could distribute to everyone.
You know, that's so hard. That's so hard to answer. Look, I can tell you, I once watched an auction where a microphone went for about $15,000, and that microphone was 75 years old. Oh, it was like a classic German condenser microphone, and it was still working.
Is that one of those
a transmitter? Ones? Yeah, well, it was a Neumann, or it might have been an AKG. But you know, some of these microphones, you know, they still have that great sound. They have valves in them, and they have that specific sound from the 30s and 40s, and they were just engineered so beautifully. Those things, you know, like they don't fail, provided you maintain them correctly. A transmitter, well, there are two things that a transmitter might fail from. One is it dries out and it just deteriorates, and there are components in a transmitter that cause them to deteriorate, particularly, as I said on the chart, the output device, the FET, or the capacitors. The other thing that happens with transmitters, though, and any piece of equipment, and the life expectancy is set by this, is that replacement components become hard to get. After a transmitter has been around for, say, 15 years, it's probably been end-of-lifed. That's a verb, isn't that amazing? End-of-lifed by the manufacturer. And at that point, it might be very difficult to get a critical component. So if that component does fail, you effectively have to throw the baby and the bathwater out, because you just can't do the repair. It's always worth coming and asking. And even yesterday, on question and answer, one of our members was searching for a VU meter to replace in a particular piece of equipment. And we had offers that came from Tasmania, from northern New South Wales, from Sydney, and from Perth. So it only took about 24 hours to find not only equivalent but identical replacement part available in a number of places as well as overseas. So how long do bits of equipment last? You know, how long's a piece of string? But a well-maintained panel might easily last for 30 or 40 years. And here's a tip. There is nothing wrong with analog equipment. Even if you have a digital transmitter, there is nothing wrong with analog equipment. It probably outperforms the digital equipment.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Indy Wood from Tubob in Taree has asked the question, where would the station go to find a good technologist? Would I be correct in assuming that the website up on the screen at the moment should be the first point of call?
Well, let's see. Technorama, yes, that would be a good place to go. You can start there. Get yourself signed up for Q&A and ask there. I did a number of things. In fact, I think we got an honourable mention or an award from CBAA one year. We ran ads on air saying, hello, would you like an exciting time? Come and join our merry crew who meet every Saturday at the station and have a good time. We'll teach you all the following things. It was just a series of ads where we did what you do with any product, which is sell it up. And I had a lot of hits out of that. We ran the campaign once. We got 4 technologists, 2 of whom who stayed around long term. And then about 3 years later, somebody ran the spots by accident twice, and we had another 2 hits.
Oh, wow.
It's radio. It's a numbers game. You never know, but sell yourself on your own medium. And then if you've got a special project, go to the community and say, we're doing a thing in Taree. We need 3 people for a weekend. We'll put you up and you'll feed you. Who's interested?
Excellent.
And somebody will say yes.
That's the way. Now, this question, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this one. Is, Cynthia Keith has asked whether calibration costs can be funded by grants. Now, I'm assuming that the CBF FAQs for development and operational grants aren't that specific, but John, would you assume that that would be something that would fall sort of under the technical stuff that the CBF would provide grants for?
Okay, I'm not going to answer that now because I'm not the person who can or should give a definitive answer. The people who can answer that question will be the grants administrators, the GAs at CBF, and those people are just incredibly helpful. So, you know, the whole team there. Call up the CBF. Nomina will answer the phone, say, I would like to talk to a grants administrator. I want help. And you will be put through to somebody who will. The question you're really asking, Cynthia, is about a services piece of work. And you need to frame this correctly. So it needs to be a project, it needs to be bounded, it needs to be justified, and you're actually crossing a line where nobody really knows how long that piece of string is yet, because so many stations have been operating for so long without ever being retweaked. There are notional costs per hour you can budget. You're talking really about a project, and projects like that might well be fundable if they are couched in the correct terms. So I'd consult the grant administrator.
Excellent. Now, I think a few people are leaving you, so I'll try and whip through these last few questions. Bogolo asked,
Sure.
For the AM transmission, is there an exciter between stereo generator and power amplifier as well? Spud Murphy's put in a little bit of an answer there in the instant message thing, but I thought I'd chuck it to you, John.
Hang on, let me just have a look at that. Yeah. So AM, sometimes they use the term exciter, especially in the days of AM stereo, but generally the device, AM you think of as slightly differently. FM transmitters are wonderful. They're very easy to put up, very easy to get going. AM transmitters are a completely different beast. AM antennas are marvels of engineering, and AM engineering is understood by way fewer people than understand FM engineering. And sad to say, I wish there were more people who understood FM engineering properly. So maybe that's one we can take offline. Yes, Bukola, there are specific devices for AM signal processing. There are devices that are optimized for AM signal processing and optimized to take advantage of the spectrum that is available, because AM typically is much lower bandwidth. Also, the requirements for how AM processors are different. So there's no pre-emphasis, blah, 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 blah.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Now, John Sedman had a question in there that I sort of don't think I really understand. I'm going to try and convey it to you anyway. Okay. BYOD, it has been expressed on me the importance of dead air. If I allow a person to bring their own, how do I govern this without first evaluating it?
That is a classic question. I mean, that's a really good question. And look, it's a challenge. Let me sort of turn the question around. You shouldn't be afraid of bring your own devices. And I personally believe it is not in the domain of the technologists to decide what should and should not be broadcast. I think it's important for the technologists to assist with the best possible quality. You know, like I said, I don't like using mice on air and I don't like using touchscreens on air. I hate layer 3 audio, MP3 audio. I hate it with a passion. I think it is one of the most horrible things to be inflicted on any concept of quality broadcasting, but it's there. And my job as a technologist is not to say you're not allowed to broadcast something if it's on a USB stick, you're not allowed to broadcast something if it's MP3. Here's how we can make that work best. And by the way, can I help you go back and find the original material? Maybe that's a better thing to do. So the way to handle bring your own devices is to set up processes which will, to the best of your ability, reduce the likelihood of something failing, and to educate your people in the best possible way to deal with those bring your own devices, and to explain to them, by the way, this is your responsibility. If there's dead air, it's your responsibility. If you haven't rehearsed enough and you don't know that it's going to work, it's your responsibility.
All right.
There endeth the lesson.
Okay, I'm not really one for responsibility myself. We should probably pull up stumps because we've run 15 minutes over time. We still had a lot of people stick around for it. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending. John Maisels, thank you so much for presenting.
Oh, a lot of fun, Dan. How much fun can a boy have?
I suppose that question's for me. Oh, geez. Answer that one.
Could really be.
Look, pleasure having you here. There's great to fly through all of that information. Absolutely wonderful stuff. I would suspect this probably isn't the last time that you'll be speaking to the sector in regards to all matters technical.
I certainly hope not.
Yeah, it's great to see everyone here for our first webinar for 2018. I look forward to another 12 months of these wonderful things. The next one's going to be February 22nd, further inventive revenue raising ideas for your community radio station. And I believe it is going to have a focus on getting started with sponsorship sales. It's going to be Nathaniel Garvin who's going to help present that one. He was the presenter of the Inventive Revenue Raising Ideas in the 2017 series of webinars. So absolutely wonderful to have him back here. But on behalf of Geordie and the rest of the staff here at the CBAA and the CMTO, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. It's lovely to have you here. Thank you so much, John Mailses, for presenting. I'll shut this webinar now so everyone can give it their evaluation. John Mailses, I'll be talking to you again real soon, mate. Oh, maybe he's turned his microphone off.
I'm sure you will, Dan. Thanks very much, everybody.
No worries, and thank you very much, everyone, for attending. On behalf of the CBAA, this is Danny Chifley saying peace. We'll see you next time.